Good afternoon, friends. Today I'll be taking up a topic on which there is not much of material available in the market. Number one. Two, for a very long time, this topic was, something like terra incognita, an unknown territory. Nobody paid any attention to this topic for a very long time. And that topic is diaspora. Now, who are diasporas? Suppose since we are talking about Indian diaspora, who are Indian diasporas? It is all the Indians who are living abroad, right? Now, diasporas are of two categories. One is PIOs, that is persons of Indian origin. Now, persons of Indian origin means they are the citizens of the country to which they have adopted, right? And only thing is that they look like Indians, they have Indian names, they might be following to whatever extent Indian culture and everything. Their origin, their ancestry is Indian. But it's not necessarily that they may be speaking the same language and other things. There will always be certain elements of assimilations, right? So they are not citizens of India, they are citizens of the country which they have adopted, number one. Two, they, as I said, they have common ancestry, that is India. Then you have another category called NRIs, that is non-resident Indians. These are basically citizens of India who are residing abroad for various reasons. Reasons could be employment, reasons could be education, reason could be business, reason could be anything, right? So they are called as NRIs. They are primarily citizens of our country but staying abroad. Then, of course, there is no such category called OCI, citizens of India, permanently staying abroad with host of nations citizenship but have ancestry with India, right? So the thing is that OCI, the recently central government has come out with a new scheme for many of our diaspora, under which they can acquire property here for business and invest in India, open an account in India, except certain restrictions. They have all the rights which normally citizens of the country has, except political rights like right to contest, right to vote and all that, right? So primarily diasporas are of two types, that is persons of Indian origin, and next is NRIs. Now, what what kind of OCIs have special facilities like multiple entry in their visas, right? So once they take, they need not apply for visa next for 10 years, 20 years, whatever could be the period, right? Some benefits like right to buy property in India using state facilities and all that, right? And please remember, diaspora as a concept in global politics is going to stay and grow with the passage of time, because two diametrically opposite phenomena are going to grow with the passage of time. One is international migration is going to grow, and secondly, opposition to migration is also going to grow. Now, for a very long time, Indian government never bothered even to study or know or understand about our own diaspora. In fact, we had a very hostile opinion about our own diaspora. We thought that these are the opportunists who left their motherland for greener pastures of life. That was broadly the official approach of government of India towards our diaspora. And that's the reason why the word NRI was even called as non-required Indians. So we had a very poor opinion, or rather a positively hostile opinion towards our diaspora. But all this changed because of say forces of globalization, forces of liberalization, increase in international migration. See, diaspora from nowhere a word started becoming everywhere word, right? Because we all know that till 1990s, right? Political science, the subject was literally unknown. Nobody studied about this, right? So even in India, as I said, the same apathy we could find in the approach of government of India. But all this changed, one at the global level and second at the state level. I mean at the national level. Global level is that the word diaspora was primarily used in the context of Jews. Because till the idea of nation state emerged, there was nothing like diaspora. People were literally free to travel. People were traveling from one country to another for business, for avoiding religious persecution. Sometimes businessmen went settled abroad just to avoid paying taxes. For many reasons, people have been traveling throughout the world, right, without any passport and visa. All this changed with the emergence of nation state. Why it changed? Because your nationality became your defining identity, right? It is in that context the term diaspora emerged and started gaining ground. And was largely used in the context of Jews. I mean, why? Because Jews is one of the unique races in the world, like Parsis, who had to flood their own country and they got dispersed throughout the world. Unlike Parsis, who by and large came to India, right? So as a result, this word was primarily used in the context of Jews, right? And to know more about why this community had to leave their own country and other things, please hear my lecture on Arab-Israel dispute. You will know more about Jews, right? So, as I said, because of all these factors, the word diaspora started gaining importance or started gaining attention. And emergence of BJP in Indian politics also started, our Indian government started shifting its attention on our diaspora. I mean, besides all the international factors that I spoke about, say your nationality becoming your defining identity, the lobbying done by Jewish diaspora, then as I said, forces of globalization, liberalization, privatization. Added to this, the one more factor from the point of view of India is that here the BJP government came to power under the leadership of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And for a very, very long time, BJP, or in its earlier avatar as Bharatiya Janata Sangh, openly talked about cultivating close relations with Israel, right? Not blindly following the Arab world. So the thing is that this party was always favorably disposed towards Israel, irrespective of the official foreign policy of the government of India, right? So once, and as I said, by the time Mr. Vajpayee became Prime Minister, global situations also changed. It led to, schisms within Islamic world. Then the historic Oslo Accord, after which followed the Camp David Accord, whereby PLO signed an agreement of peace with Israel. So the global situations also changed. But as I said, for a very, very long time, Janata Sangh wanted to leverage Indian diaspora just like Israel does with their diaspora, right? So under the leadership of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, when BJP government came, he constituted a committee under the chairmanship of Mr. L.M. Singhvi, which is even called as L.M. Singhvi Committee. And mandate of the committee was to at least to know what is the spread of our diaspora, to know its various dimensions. What are their problems? What are their expectations? What are their contributions? What are their achievements? To study all this, this committee was constituted. somewhere in 2002, and uh, that committee, so somewhere in 2000, and that committee submitted its reports to then Prime Minister L.M. Singhvi, as you know, a very great constitutionalist, jurist, diplomat, or educationist, all rolled into one, father of Abhishek Manu Singhvi, spokesman of Congress. Right? They made in-depth study and came out and submitted the report in the year 2002. Based on the recommendations of this committee, a separate ministry was constituted called Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs. But by the time this ministry was actually constituted, BJP lost power, Manmohan Singh became, Congress government came back to power, and it was under the ministry, under Prime Ministership of Manmohan Singh, that this ministry was constituted, although it was one of the recommendations of L.M. Singhvi committee, right? So the thing is that is how we started recognizing and acknowledging our diaspora. And that was roughly the time when global situation also started becoming hostile towards migrants. So, and many times Indian diaspora got caught in crossfire in warlike situations, say in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq. So it was quite natural that they always looked up to India for help. So it is with this intention we started focusing more and more on our diaspora, right? See, there are various problems like racial discrimination, political turmoil, right? Indian brides getting cheated, financial slowdown, low employment generation in developed countries, right? Then political spectrum catering to anti-immigration voices. All these issues culminated in not only Indian government, but governments throughout the world focusing more and more on their diaspora. Now, as I said, now there is a sea change in not only the attitude of government of India, but governments all over the world about diasporas are no more perceived as say opportunists who left their motherland for greener pastures of life or better opportunities. Today, the contribution of diaspora is not only acknowledged by the mother country, it is being acknowledged by the host country as well. As a result, they have become quite significant, occupying the cutting edge of policy making, into business, into various fields, and all this influence of diaspora, the respective country wants to leverage in their diplomacy. In fact, as I said, with the strong emergence of BJP, and especially after 2014, diaspora has become important tool for our diplomacy, right? So there has been sea change in the attitudes. Reasons being success of diasporas and success of other countries in leveraging their diaspora, especially Israel. Take for example, America is a very, very close country to most of the Gulf countries. But on all the issues, but whenever the issue of Arab-Israel dispute comes, invariably not only America but all their allies support Israel. Why? Because there is so much of pressure of Jewish diaspora, although they constitute just 2% of American population, but they are into the cutting edge of decision making, the cutting edge of research in the areas of science and technology, in financial sector. They lobby very hard with the senators, they finance the elections of senators. As a result, no government in America, whether belonging to Republican Party or Democratic Party, can adopt a foreign policy which is hostile to the interest of Israel, right? That is how Israel leverages its own diaspora. So Indian government also, especially under BJP, wants to follow the example of Israel. right? So this is about diaspora. And as I said, with the passage of time, two conflicting tendencies are going to continue in the global politics. One is um, international migration, immigration is going to increase, and secondly, opposition to migration is also going to increase. Now, question arises: if particular countries are so much opposed to migration, they can as well ban it. What prevents them from banning it? Fact is that international migration is going to increase because it benefits not only the person who is migrating and his family, but it also benefits the host country as well as the mother country. That is the reason why it is going to increase. There are certain specific reasons. Let us say immigrants often do jobs that people in the host country will not do or cannot do. There are many menial jobs which people in developed country do not do. As a result, they take, for example, America. They do require, say, carpenters, masons from countries, I mean, from Latin American countries or countries like Mexico, Venezuela, Colombia, and El Salvador, San Salvador, Nicaragua, and many are even illegally trying to migrate into America from Cuba as well, a communist country. So, as I said, and they often do jobs which local people cannot do. Then migrant workers often work for longer hours and for lower wages. It may sound exploitative, but it benefits everyone. See, exploitative by whose standards? Maybe by your and my standards. But you ask the person, the the immigrant, he is quite comfortable, rather he is very happy with whatever he is getting, right? So don't judge this aspect. It may sound exploitative, but it is certainly not exploitation for the person whom we feel is being exploited, right? That's the reason why it is continuing. Then migrants work for all this provides, then you may say why the developed world is not preventing it. As I said, it benefits their company. It makes their products very competitive in the global market, right? And as I said, they they offer talent pool to overcome this gap in skills. Today, look at West Asian countries. Can they do without migrants in areas like high technology, in software, for menial jobs? You take any area, expert doctors, right? Pilots with high level of operational skills, you will simply do not find the local people uh, up to the task in all these areas. As a result, they will have to encourage immigrations, right? So these are the plus, they bridge the talent gap in a particular country. Then they pay taxes and contribute to the development of the host nations. These are the reasons why, as I said, immigration is going to grow with the passage of time. Then what exactly are the negatives of immigration? As I said, immigrants are mostly exploited as cheap labor. It's a fact. But again, let me say this with by underlining the fact that the person who is exploited do not perceive it that way, right? Developing countries may suffer due to the brain drain from the loss of skilled professionals. Now, what is brain drain? Brain drain is nothing but the developing countries or poor countries losing their talent pool to developed world, right? That is highly skilled doctors, engineers, management experts, professionals, academicians leaving their own country, which are poor, and going to uh, developed world and offer their services. As a result, the poor countries, the developing countries lose their talent pool, right? And this has to be viewed in against the fact that higher education is extremely subsidized in poor countries. So Of course, this is lost to the developing country, but there is other side to it also. I'll tell you later. Then immigration not only attracts job seekers, immigrants also attract many kind of illegal activities. Especially, it is a huge attraction for organized crimes, activities like gambling dens, activities like prostitution rings, activities like child labor. There are many kinds of what we call as organized crime that migration attracts. Then immigration can become a social political issue where racism can be used to exploit feelings or as an excuse for current problems of local populations, right? So, as I said, all over the world, anti-immigration voices are continuing. And one more issue is that many a times the developed world, especially after 2008, has started imposing too many, I mean, their immigration policy has become highly restrictive, right? As a result, many a times it is leading to illegal migration. And what happens is that because of few illegal immigrants, the entire community of legal immigrants gets the bad name, right? That is, most of the immigrants must be very honest, tax paying, law abiding citizens or the workers in that country. But because of certain illegal migrants, they too get very bad name, and many a times they too become target of racial hate and whatever you may call, right? Then recipient countries, then as a result, illegal immigrations are also increasing with the passage of time. And let me tell you, illegal immigration also is going to continue, not only because of extreme poverty in poor countries, but also because of the fact that in case of many countries, it's a low risk, high returns area. As long as people feel that it is highly paying to migrate, even if we are caught, we will be getting some minor punishments, and slowly and steadily we might even legalize our status, right? This is also one of the reasons why illegal migration is going to continue for a long time, right? Then, as I said, sometimes the host nation itself looks the other way when they have to confront this problem of illegal migration, because as I said, many a times it helps them. Then again, the debate boils down to two things, that is remittances and brain drain. While covering brain drain, I told you that, well, a poor country certainly loses their talent pool to the developed world. And this has to be viewed against the fact that higher education, technical education is extremely financed or subsidized by the respective governments. So actually their services of such highly skilled people are required in the poor countries, but when time comes, they leave for better prospects to and offer their services to already developed world. Now, as I said, there is other side to it also. Question arises, what are the opportunities we are offering to such highly talented people, right? Because it's not that every talented person is a sadhu or a sannyasi or a recluse who will not mind serving their motherland irrespective of the cost which they have to pay. Because all such talented people also expect good life, a quality life, a safe, secured life, and other things. See, selling point of this developed world is not only money. There are many other aspects also, right? So question arises, what we have to offer. That's why the former Indian ambassador to America, Mr. Abid Hussain, used to support brain drain, and he went to the extent of saying a brain drain is better than brain inside the drain, right? And he quoted the example of Hargobind Singh Khurana. a scientist who couldn't get uh, a meager scholarship amount from Government of India. He migrated to America and went on to get Nobel Prize in the area of genetics and all that, right? So there is flip side to it also, right? So now if we complain about brain drain, the argument of developed world is that, okay, why you cry so much about brain drain? You are ultimately benefited through the process of remittances. And please remember, India is the country which attracts maximum remittances in the world. Our remittances are anywhere between 70 to 80 billion dollars annually, right? Remittances significantly improve the living standard of the household that receive them. Then many countries think in terms of labor and even skill export as competitive advantage and think of ways to maximize its. I think Skill India is also a part of this, right? There are many initiatives. Then you have a council for promotion of employment overseas, right? So these are the arguments in favor of brain drain, that when a country receives so much in the form of remittances, they should not complain about brain drain. As I said, almost the world, poor countries receive anywhere between 100 to 110 billion dollars as remittances. And remittances, 90% is a one-way traffic, that is from developed world to developing world. As migration is also one-way traffic, that is from poor countries to rich countries. Remittances is other way around, right? As a result, the thing is, this kind of migration or this brain drain continues. In fact, there are many writers. I give you the example of Abid Hussain, who used to say brain drain actually benefits the country, benefits the mother country, right? So we should not oppose brain drain. Of course, there are many views, like there can always be a counter view, that is, had this talented pool of people stayed back in the country, they would have contributed so much by their skills. Plus, just imagine how much they would have contributed to the national tax kitty. Such high earners would have contributed so much to our tax revenues. Then, as I said, many a times remittances are very rarely used for productive purposes, that is creating business, creating jobs and other things. Many a times they are used for conspicuous consumption, but even that benefits a country in the long run, may not be as much as had that money been used for productive purposes or for further production, right? Then there are many other problems associated with this, right, with migration, right? So these are all the flip side of it. And next is that people who argue against remittances, they say that, well, the benefits of remittances are there for all to see and even measure or calculate or quantify. But the possible losses on account of brain drain is very, very difficult to quantify, right? So, as I said, remittances versus brain drain is an endless debate, right? Then as I said, loss of skilled manpower imposes a different kind of cost on their countries of origin, right? These are the, then I also said the point, country of the origin loses the tax revenue that these potential high earners would have paid into the national resources. These are the points you can see. So, as I said, whether this debate is endless, but the fact is that international migration is going to grow with the passage of time, and opposition to that is also going to grow because of recession in developed world, especially after 2008. Then there is something called digital diaspora. Who are these digital diasporas? These are high earners, technical people, highly professional people, especially into the world of IT, who, because of several reasons, they still have a very strong sense of attachment with their motherland. And one fact which our diaspora or any diaspora discovers with the passage of time is that unless and until their motherland develops, they will not be respected in the adopted country, irrespective of their contribution and achievements. Right? As a result, this particular kind of, not the entire diaspora I'm talking about, this is highly well connected, well networked, a fast moving, well educated, connected diaspora, which strongly has this feeling. Right? As a result, they always, through their networking, they lobby for their mother country, lobby for aid, they create a very positive, they always work in the direction of creating a positive image about their motherland in their adopted country. They want the adopted country to develop, has close friendly relations with their motherland, and they try to influence public policy. They try to lobby for the aid. These are the things which digital diaspora do, and sometimes they even would like to change the government in their mother country, if they feel that that particular political party which is ruling is not nationalistic enough, or which does not believe in making the country strong economically and militarily. Right? Like they intervene hugely, Indian diaspora tried to influence the election result in 2014 as well as 2019. And let me not mince word or try to sound politically correct. The reality is that BJP in India is the most preferred choice of 90% diaspora. And this particular diaspora played a great role in popularizing or building the image of Narendra Modi, or creating a very, very favorable atmosphere for BJP globally. Right? Then they lobby. What is that they do? They lobby for aid, they create awareness, they create cultural awareness, they lobby for the aid. Sometimes they try to, as I said, influence the electoral outcome in their mother country if they feel the particular party or government is weak or cannot withstand international pressure. See, for us these things may not matter much, but for diaspora these things are very, very significant, because they want to change the perception about their country in the adopted land. So that's the reason why they take, for example, the Arab Spring. The change in the government in Egypt was as much the result of the local protest as it was the handiwork of Egyptian diaspora staying abroad. That led to change in the regime in Egypt, regime of Hosni Mubarak. Right? I'll cover this more when I cover Arab Spring or Jasmine Revolution. Then cultural awareness, these are the things that diaspora do. Now, as I said, with the passage of time, global migration is going to increase, and anti-migrant voices are also going to increase, as we see throughout the world. Some people have even come to the power on anti-migration platform. The classic example is Mr. Donald Trump. Right? Now, without going into whether that is right or wrong, that's not the purpose of a student of international relations. Rather than taking moral positioning, we have to understand and analyze the concept. Right? So this is going to increase. Now, different countries are responding to this problem in a different way, in their own way. Like, let us see, some countries are become very strict, some are slightly lenient, some are trying to discourage it with stringent policy measures, right? There are different ways. Some have tightened up their internal security mechanism, right? So as a result, these things are continuing. Let us see how different countries are responding to this problem in different ways. Let us see how different countries are responding to this problem. Let me begin with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia launched a scheme called Nitakat in 2011. Now, what was this Nitakat? Perhaps I have not explained it to here. I'll explain it to you in greater detail. Under this scheme, companies were given colors, right? And based on those colors, companies, private companies or private sector was given incentives or taxes. Taxes were imposed, like incentives and disincentives, right? And the rule was, if a particular company, say, employs more than 70% of migrant labor, then that was classified as red. Means it will be taxed more. Many of the government incentives will be withdrawn to it, right? Like this, say 50 to 70% green color, right? 30 to 50% blue color, like that. And if a company was employing more than 70% locals, it was given white color, so more incentives, less taxation and all that. See, the whole objective was to encourage private sector to avoid migrants and employ locals, right? But very soon Saudi Arabia realized that they do not have enough workers in construction sites. Then they do not have enough bankers, enough auditors, qualified, say, doctors, right? And not only that, the locals whom they wanted to employ, they were either not up to the task and they were demanding more when compared to the migrants who were highly skilled, plus even with a lesser amount, they were willing to work. Of course, that less is very high by the standards of the mother country, right? So then they realized that there is not enough cashier in retail stores, in say, as I said, aviation pilots, then domestic household works, right, with which they mostly required from countries like Sri Lanka, Philippines, Pakistan, Bangladesh, right? So one sector after another was exempted from Nitakat, right? And financial firms, it was difficult for locals to reach the high skills requirement, right? So all these things, they started exempting one area after another from Nitakat, right? But as I said, this does not mean that nobody lost their jobs and other thing. Significant numbers of Indians lost their jobs after Nitakat. But Nitakat did not affect the employment market in a great way. It did affect to an extent, but not overall picture did not change. Even today in private sector in Saudi Arabia, for every one local employed, there are 6 migrants who are employed. This I am talking about private sector, right? And today there are almost anywhere between 60 to 80 lakhs Indians workers working in Gulf countries, not just Saudi Arabia, all the Gulf countries. And then there are not just Indians, there are migrants from many countries, because as I said, Gulf countries are not, without migrants, their economies will come to standstill. Of course, now they can have a very preferential policy with regard to migrants because of slowdown in the world. Right. Then, as I said, there are so many Indians. Now, Malaysia has a population of almost 3 crores. Out of that, it has 2 million legal migrants and equal number of illegal migrants. Now, when these things are brought to the notice of Malaysian government, they simply look the other way, because Malaysia requires workers to work in road, laying of roads, in hospitality industry, in hotels, in sectors like construction sites, in plantations, in restaurants. All these are the areas where Malaysia require people to work. Then bulk of illegal immigrants come from countries like Indonesia, Nepal, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and India. Right? So, despite those strict policies, these things are illegal migration into Malaysia is continuing. Right? Now, let us come to Indian diaspora and its spread. See, as I said, it is the second largest diaspora, which is worldwide estimated to be anywhere between 2.7 to 3 crores, right? Spread across almost 190 countries, right? And it is, now when we study about Indian diaspora, we have to understand certain basic historical facts and the different dimensions of diaspora, right? So let us see what exactly are different types of diaspora. First, you can call as mercantile diaspora. Of course, I have not mentioned it here. It is a later day information which I got. Mercantile diaspora are the one, this is mostly Gujaratis who went there almost 150 to 200 years back, primarily to countries like South Africa, Kenya, and to African continent. And there are enough evidence that much before Vasco da Gama, the Gujarati Bhais have been doing maritime business with countries like with Arabian countries and African countries. In fact, there is a strong theory to suggest that they were having such big ships that Vasco da Gama borrowed that ship from one of the Gujaratis, right? So this is, and many settled there, and many though settled there but continued their relationship with, I mean, they keep coming to Gujarat. If you go to places like Navsari or say Valsad, Vapi, you can find many such diasporas who still have their relations in Kenya, in South Africa, in Uganda and other places. So this is the first kind of diaspora. Though they left India, they took the citizenship of other countries, but somewhere down the line, they do maintain contact with the motherland, primarily with their region, that is Gujarat. Then, second type of diaspora is what we call as the labor diaspora, right? They went, this is the result of colonialism, right? How? Because Britishers took many Indian laborers, of course laborers from other countries also, but Britishers took primarily from India to work in plantations, especially in areas like say Caribbean islands, which were the colonies of Britain, to countries like say Maldives, Sri Lanka. While covering Sri Lanka, I explained you the difference between Indian Tamils and Sri Lankan Tamils. Indian Tamils are those who were forcibly taken by colonial masters to work in tea plantations. Similarly to Caribbean islands, to work in tea plantations, to work in sugarcane plantations, to work in maize plantations, and that was also the time when railways was discovered and it was expanding. To work on railway sites, to work as domestic help. For many of these things, they were, please remember, they never went on their own, they were forcibly taken, right? And the characteristics of this diaspora is that they were forcibly taken and they were left just like that, and once colonialism ended, they couldn't come back to their own motherland, so they lost all their contact with motherland, right? And though they lost all their contact with their motherland, at the same time they are not completely assimilated or accepted in the countries to which they have adopted, right? So they do face discrimination. You may say that it is black race. In fact, it is the black race which commits discrimination against these Indians, right? I mean, if you look at West Indies, see, West Indies is group of Caribbean islands. Be very clear, there is no nation called West Indies. It is only a cricket team. What you call West Indies is basically a group of independent nations called Caribbean islands, right? West Indies cricket team always had Indian. 50s we had Soni Ramadhin, 60s we had Rohan Kanhai, 70s we had Alvin Kalicharan, 80s we had Shiv Narayan, then Chandrapal and all that, right? So the thing is that, but the local people do not consider them as, say, Negroes or something like that. They are still called as Indians because of physical features, because of, although they have adapted to the local language, local food habits and other things, yet they have this feeling that they are Indians because physically they look quite different from the local population, right? So, but this was the result of colonialism. They were forcibly taken and they lost. After colonialism ended, they stayed there, they acquired the citizenship, they were granted citizenship, and they, to a great extent, assimilated in the local culture, and to a great extent, they could not, maybe because the local atmosphere was slightly discriminatory against them. As a result, they do have this feeling that they are Indians because of appearance, because of so many other factors, right? But fact is that they lost all their all the contacts with their motherland. So they, despite prosperity, despite good life, somewhere down the line, they are alienated. That emptiness they have, right? They do not feel that connected because of the reasons which I have mentioned. So these are called as labor diaspora, which is the result of colonialism. Similarly, they were taken to countries like South Africa, they were taken to countries like Maldives, right? And this has been going on for very, very long time. Then you have diaspora, you can call them as worker diaspora. Professional diaspora. Now, what is professional diaspora? How it is different from the first two varieties of diaspora? This is the result of post-independence India, right? When there were less universities, some universities produced highly qualified professionals, right? In the form of, say, engineers, doctors, bankers, management experts, or academicians, professors. They migrated on their own for better life, for better opportunities, or for a very comfortable living. So they migrated largely to countries like England, France, Canada, and some migrated to Australia, Singapore, New Zealand, right? This happened somewhere in 60s and early 70s, late 60s and early 70s, right? And they went on their own and they are very happy. They normally do not have much contact with their motherland, except when mother died or some important occasion. They came back, went back again, and they have acquired citizenship there, and they are happy being called American, Canadian, Australian, or Britisher. They do not carry their Indian identity at sleeves, right? And they are very happy, they are comfortable. And as I said, they maintain minimum contacts with their motherland, and they are very comfortable and happy that way. Now, the fourth kind of diaspora, we call them as worker diaspora. This is largely the result of oil boom in Gulf countries, right? Since they required semi-skilled or non-skilled workers in great numbers, and people migrated from India, especially from regions like, say, Kerala, Uttar Pradesh, and Andhra Pradesh, or right now Telangana. From these are the regions, especially the city of Hyderabad. Most of these workers migrated, bombing from Mumbai to Gulf countries. Of course, initially some got citizenship, and after that hardly few people, because these Gulf countries don't give citizenship to any outsiders, right? So, but work, you can come and work, absolutely no problem. So these workers, and with slowly and steadily, their numbers became huge. Today, as I said, there must be anywhere between 60 to 80 lakhs Indians working in Gulf countries, right? They know they can never get citizenship there. So one day or the other, they have to come back. And in many cases, they haven't taken their families. As a result, they constantly maintain their touch with the motherland. They keep coming back. They send whatever they earn after keeping certain minimum amount for subsistence back to India, right, for their families and other dependents. So this is the fourth kind of diaspora. Now, fifth kind of diaspora is what we call as IT diaspora or software diaspora. This happened largely because of IT, spread of IT, that is information technology, right? This was the result, happened largely in 1990s, and it is continuing since then, late 1990s, say after 1995, 96, and it is continuing, right? And it became quite heavy in early 2000, right? And this is the diaspora which largely went from cities like Hyderabad and Bangalore, Chennai, primarily from south, but throughout the country. Highly skilled people in software skills, they migrated primarily to America, and that too within America, primarily to California and to an extent New Jersey, right? And some migrated to, say, Canada, England, Australia, and to Singapore. Same what we find in 60s, right? Now, this particular diaspora carries their Indianness on their sleeves, in the sense, every time they assert their Indian identity, even after acquiring green card or even citizenship, they address themselves as Indian Americans, right? So for everything, for even smallest of the functions, they visit India with their family. They have maintained the connectivity and they try to popularize India there. And they, as I said, they carry their Indianness everywhere, wherever they go, right? In the sense, they don't teach their daughters hip hop. They want their daughters to learn Bharatnatyam or Kuchipudi. They want to feel connected by being connected to India, right? So this is the fifth kind of diaspora. To, recollect: first, mercantile diaspora; second, labor diaspora; third, professional diaspora; fourth, worker diaspora, which went to Gulf countries; and fifth, IT diaspora. These are the 5 different kinds of diaspora which India has. So you can find so much of diversity among our diasporas, right? All this I have explained just now, right? Now, spread of diaspora. What is the spread of our diaspora? As I said, they are anywhere between 2.7 to 3 crores spread in 190 countries. They are 10,000 or above in 48 countries, 500,000, that is 5 lakhs in about 11 countries. Then slowly and steadily they are becoming majority in many countries. Take for example, Mauritius 61%, Trinidad and Tobago 40%, Guyana 51%, Fiji 42%, Suriname 35%, Malaysia 7.2%, South Africa 3%. There are visible minorities in countries like United Kingdom 2.10%, USA it's almost 2% today, Canada 2.6%, Hong Kong, Singapore 5.40%. Almost all West Asian countries have large presence of Indian diaspora. It is anywhere between 60 lakhs to 80 lakhs, right? And let us now come to the contribution of Indian diaspora. See, they contribute heavily to the mother country in the form of remittances, right? As I said, India is the first country in the world, rather the highest recipient of remittances. And remittances many a times is beneficial to the receiving country. They offset the budget deficit, they contribute for the growth. In fact, it is $80 billion, which is more than our FDIs, right? And 20% of the state Kerala budget is the result of remittances. In fact, without tourism and remittances, Kerala will simply collapse. There are at least 20 lakhs Keralites working in Gulf countries, right? So then building foreign exchange reserves, they offset the rising trade deficits. These are the contribution of our diasporas, right? Then they contribute to 3 to 4% of India's GDP. About Kerala, I already told you the figure of remittances stands anywhere between 70 to 80 billion dollars, right? So all these are the contribution of Indian diaspora. Plus, the greatest contribution of Indian diaspora, especially the fifth kind of diaspora. What is the fifth diaspora? IT diaspora. Is that they have changed the perception about India. India is no more perceived as a land of snake charmers or a backward country, poor country, right? A country with illiterate people. Why? It is this diaspora that has changed the perception. Now India is perceived as a country of highly talented people, country of technical manpower, country of highly, what should I say, with great amount of technical manpower, a forward-looking country, a highly democratic country, right? Country from which a country endowed with various kind of soft power in the form of yoga, meditation, and all that. A country from which can contribute so much to the world and from which we can learn so much. So, personally, I feel the greatest contribution of Indian diaspora, especially the fifth variety of diaspora, is that they have changed perception about India, right? Well, when our diaspora is doing so much for us, question arises, what is that we are doing for them? It's not as if entire our diaspora community is very rich, influential and all that, right? And it's not as if they have some sort of a cohesiveness in their expectations from India. No, it's a very diverse group, except they are united only by the fact that they are Indians. Except that, see, it's not as if they don't have problems, it's not as if they don't face hardship, and there are many times they are caught into crossfire. So question arises, when diaspora is doing so much for their mother country, what is that government of India is doing for them? What is that we are doing for them, right? So let us look at because as I said, anti-immigrants sentiments is growing everywhere. Sometimes diasporas are punished, they are made to work for long hours. There is a very hostile atmosphere for diasporas in many countries, especially, I mean, with the exception of countries like Australia and Canada. Today there is anti-migrant voices in all parts of the world, including developed world. See, Canada and Australia, you will not find it so much because these are extremely large countries, thinly populated, right? Both the countries, Canada must be 5 times the size of India, yet its population is just 3 crores, right? Same is the case with Australia. It is almost double the size of India, but its population is, I mean, every year we add one Australia, right? So but even there, of late, there are anti-immigration voices, right? Then some countries are curbing access to public services like education, emergency, medical care, right? So there is, as I said, French government are conducting surprise raids in production sites. There are citizens patrols in Italy, whereby citizens go and inform about illegal migrants, right? As a result, atmosphere is very hostile. Countries are responding, I mean, in various ways, from deporting back to sending them to jail. In some areas there are whiplashes and all that. So question arises, when our diaspora is contributing so much to the country, both in material and perceptional sense, what is that government of India is doing. Let us look at the initiatives taken by government of India. See different countries, how they are responding. You can read it from there. Establishing 42 community welfare funds in missions abroad to help the, deliberately use this abbreviation called D for diaspora, community in times of difficulty. Then pension and LIC schemes are extended for Indian workers to enable them to voluntarily save for their return and resettlement. See, as long as you are young, you can earn much and other things, but what happens when you become infirm or when you become old? You have to save for your old age. So LIC and pension scheme are being extended to diaspora. Then establishing a full-fledged ministry called Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs, which please remember was the result of LM Singhvi committee, which was constituted by Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Based on the report of that committee, this ministry was formed, and now it stands, it is not abolished, it has become a department in Ministry of External Affairs. It has been merged to, now there is no separate Ministry of External Affairs, but it has been merged with Ministry of External Affairs, right, from 2014. Now building Pravasi Bharati Kendra, right, 5 PIO universities are going to come up in India exclusively for diaspora children, right. Then every year 9th January is celebrated as Pravasi Bharati Divas, right. Why we have chosen 9th January? Because there is a reason behind it. That is the day when Mahatma Gandhi returned from South Africa. Remember, Gandhi was also a diaspora that way, right, from South Africa and landed into India. So 9th January every year we celebrate Pravasi Bharati Divas, a diaspora day. Now why we started celebrating this every year? Purpose was to connect the Indian diaspora, which is so diverse, which is spread throughout the world, to connect them with the motherland, right. It is with that intention their contributions are acknowledged, it is rewarded, there are award functions, right, and the cultural diversities of India is presented to them, especially with regard to cuisines, food items, India's tourist attractions, they are taken to all these places. The purpose is to ensure that, to bring the spread out diaspora to a common platform. This is the primary objective of celebrating Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. Now it has become an yearly affair. Then dual citizenship also, this was again the idea conceived by Mr. Vajpayee, extending certain facilities to our diasporas with regard to investment, with regard to purchasing property here, except I think agricultural property, many other multiple entries into visas, many such facilities are being extended to Indian diaspora. The Know India program, under this youths from 18 to 26, like this 40 youths are sponsored, their visit and to and fro charges are taken care by Government of India, and these 40 students are taken to different parts of India. As I think you should know that in terms of tourist attraction, India has everything to offer, right from wildlife to pilgrimage to snow to mountains to sea beaches to adventure sports to medical tourism, health tourism, adventure sites, everything, right, to rivers, to lakes, but to trekking, all that, everything. All these things are shown to our diaspora. After all, how many country can boast of having lion as well as tiger in the same country? There is no such country in the world, right? So all these things are offered to them, and in turn these 40 students who come every year, 40 different students, they become brand ambassadors of India, and they feel some sense of attachment and sense of pride for being Indian, right? So they are All these are part of soft power of India, extension of soft power of India, right? So for No India program. Then SPDC, Scholarship Program for Diaspora Children. This was started from 2007 and it continues, right? Then legal and financial assistance to Indian women deserted by their husbands. Then Tracing Roots program. Many of the diaspora people who feel intense sense of attachment with their motherland, they also want to know from where they are, right? What is their origin? Sometimes they want to go back to the villages, right? It may not be very big things for us, but sometimes many people spend their lifetime on tracing their roots. Especially, I'm told some one or two Hollywood movies also have come on this issue. So anyway, that program is also there. Then legal and financial assistance to Indian women deserted by their overseas husbands. Then Pravasi Bharati Samman Awards, which we constituted from 2003. Every year it is part of Pravasi Bharati Divas, whereby we honor, acknowledge the contribution of our diaspora, individual contribution as well as group contribution of whatever they have done in their adopted country and whatever they are doing for their own motherland. Their contributions and their achievements are acknowledged and rewarded. Then e-remittances called Pravasi Bharati Seva. It is an online service to advise diaspora on investment, taxation and real estate. And finally, Council for Promotion of Overseas Employment, a strategic think tank which will devise strategy to enable Indian workers to take advantage of emerging opportunities in the international labor market. See, there is a huge market for many kinds of professions. So as a result, there are so much of poverty, so much job seekers in India. They can be accommodated in different countries. Only thing is that they must have knowledge. They must be properly informed, properly guided as to where their skills are required. And this particular platform provides exactly this. They firstly advise the prospective job seekers to acquire a particular skill which is in demand in a particular country, right? And secondly, they provide guidance as to where are the possible places where they can find jobs. Take for example, today I see so many school teachers being paid a meager amount, right? 5,000 rupees, and they are not sure whether they will be there next month or not. Whereas if only they migrate to say countries like Eritrea in Africa, countries like Somalia or countries like Uganda, they can get very good job as school teachers and with a very good pay, perhaps a minimum pay of 1 lakh rupees, right? So this Council for Promotion of Overseas Employment does precisely this. I can give you one example. Today, European countries, Europe, America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Gulf countries, there is a huge shortage of healthcare workers, nurses and other healthcare workers. Shortage runs to the tune of at least 10 million or into crores, right? And with a crash course in say Arabic, Spanish, French or some other European language, many of our nurses can find a very good, highly paying employment in these countries. There is a huge shortage. So the purpose of Council for Promotion of Overseas Employment is precisely this, to advise. Then role of diaspora, I already told you, they are contributing heavily to their adopted country and they are contributing heavily to India also by way of remittances, by way of, as I said, changing perception about India, by way of promoting soft power of India. They have become important tool for our diplomacy, right? For lobbying for India, for creating awareness about India, right? So because all this is huge contribution, and as per one estimate, every year they contribute almost $400 billion of output worldwide. And Indian diaspora, Indian community throughout the world is considered as no nonsense community, right? Even if you give them migration, they will not cause any trouble to their adopted country. That is how it is perceived. That is not the way Pakistani diaspora is perceived. That is not the way, diaspora from many African countries are perceived. That is not the way diaspora from many Islamic countries are perceived. The way Indians are respected, Indians are most, what should I say, appreciated for their hard work, for their professionalism, and for their the basic attitude of not creating trouble for their adopted country, right? So as a result, all this is changing perception about India and its diaspora. See, besides remittances, diasporas contributes vast reservoirs of potential investors. Today they have become potential investors. And let me tell you, a large segment of Indian diaspora today are doing extreme amount of charity, not only in India, but even the country to which they have adopted. The classic case is Lakshmi Nivas Mittal, right? And they have become investors, they have become business leaders, the corporate giants, right? They also represent knowledge, expertise, skills in diverse sectors, right? And many diasporas, rich people, are helping Indian NGOs who are working in the fields of water conservation, for child labor, for say adult education, for providing health care, for providing glasses, for providing artificial legs, and all that to handicapped people. There are many areas where rich Indian diaspora people are contributing, and they are free online platform is also there, whereby they share their knowledge and expertise with many Indians who are seeking for that, right? So these are all areas where they are working. Now I cannot cover all 190 countries, that's not required also. I'll briefly take some 5 or 6 countries which I felt was important, right? Otherwise you will have to read at least 20 books in order to understand this much of information about our diaspora. Like England, they have a significant presence in IT, in medicines. 6% of doctors are Indians. Community is active in politics as well. It has 4 elected members of parliament, right? That is House of Commons, 11 in House of Lords, something like your Rajya Sabha, where you had people like Lord Suraj Pal, Lord Bhigu Parikh, Lord Meghnad Desai, Lord there are many rich Indian businessmen and highly qualified academicians who got this lordship. At the lower level of political participation, there are 250 to 300 councillors, something like our corporators, right, who are there in England, right? When London Zoo fell short of finances, zoo people turned towards Suraj Pal for helping them with his money. When a big university in England felt shortage of funds, they looked up to Lakshmi Nivas Mittal, right? And even Baba Ramdev has a huge tract of island near Scotland, I think. There he wants to build a, health tourism, yoga tourism, something like he wants to do. There are many, you'll be surprised to know that many a times Mahesh Yogi, who had immense property there, he successfully bidded for properties where the bid of Queen of England failed, right? So there is a huge contribution, success story about India with regard to England. Now coming to Indian diaspora, right? This is one area where I can speak with sufficient amount of, I won't say authority, but sufficient amount of information and knowledge, right? Though Indians constitutes hardly 2% of the population, right? You will be surprised to know that there are 2 lakhs families that are millionaires in America, right? Their median income, as per one report of Duke University, which was conducted by professors like Vivek Wadhwa and some other American professors, right? 2 million Indians are 2 lakh Indians are millionaires, and Indians are the fastest growing community both economically as well as education. If you look at the mean income of an average American, it is $38,885, whereas Indian it is $60,093, almost roughly double, slightly less than double, right? Education wise, average Indians is 3 times more than Americans. They have significant presence in managerial and professional positions. They are working on critical projects in USA labs and in private research labs like IBM, Boeing, Bell, DuPont, right? As I said, and not only that, they are becoming investors also. They are acquiring, most of the acquisitions today are being done by Indian businessmen. What are acquisitions? Like local American person, industrialist is not able to run his business empire properly. Indians are purchasing it and running it successfully. I can give you the list of what they are acquiring. And today, at least 1 lakh Indian student every year join American university. Their contribution is to the extent of 2.40 billion US dollars in the form of fees, right? And one more very, very surprising statistics. As I said, Indians constitute less than 2% of American population, but 40% of the motels in America are owned by Indians, that too Gujaratis, and within Gujaratis, Patels, right? They must be less than 0.5%. Patels must be 0.00% population of America, but 40% of the motels means something like highway hotels, something like dhaba with accommodation facilities, right? 40% such motels in America are owned by Patel community from Gujarat, right? And their combined worth is 130 billion. And not only that, see, opposition to immigration is primarily because of job loss. Just imagine the level of jobs which they are creating. Take for example, these Patels employ almost 6 lakhs workers, right? So there is so much of, then two governors, a post significant next only to the President of America, right? Like Bobby Jindal in Louisiana and Nikki Haley from South Carolina. Both were Indians, right? Plus, Nikki Haley went on to become the permanent representative of United States to UN. Real name of Nikki Haley is Nimrata Randhawa. She is a Punjabi. And 2 of their important senators, Kamala Harris, who is going to be vice presidential candidate from Democratic Party, is from India, from California. Then Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii could emerge as a presidential candidate, right? So, plus you can find their success stories so much there. Plus the attorneys, professors, some of their top-notch businessmen today are Indians despite having just 2% of population, right? So the thing is that this is the contribution, and they are doing maximum number of startups. Acquisitions are all-time high. So this is and I will not be surprised if by 2024 or 2028, an Indian could be President of America, right? This is their contribution in American politics. Then the Indian diaspora is mostly, they are into professions like doctors, engineers, academicians, right? Plus, one of their defense minister, I think, is a Sardarji from Punjab. Today, Punjabi is recognized as the 3rd language in Canada. So, again, their contribution of Indians is huge there. Then Trinidad and Tobago. See, most of you must be having the impression that since most of the Indians went there as laborers, they might be laborers even today. That's not the case. They are no more laborers. They are academicians, they are businessmen, they are bankers, they are management experts, they are engineers, they are doctors, they are head of the nations also. Just take the case of Mauritius. For a very, very long time, even today, Prime Minister of Mauritius is Indian. Earlier, it was Shivsagar Ramgoolam, Anirudh Jagannath, right? All were Indians. Take the case of Fiji, Mahendranath Chaudhary, who was president of Fiji for such a long time, right? Or take the case of Trinidad and Tobago, the Kamla Prasad Biseswar. She is Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. She was also the chief guest for Pravasi Bharati Divas in 2011 at Jaipur, right? So their contribution is there everywhere: politics, law, medicines, academics, wherever you look into, you can find the contribution. Plus cricket, I already told you, some of the finest cricketers from West Indies have been Indians, whether Soni Ramadhin, Rohan Kanhai, Alvin Kalicharan, or any of these, right? So the thing is that, and head of the nations. Today they are, as I said, they are no more laborers. They have become one of the most successful communities without any reservations, without any support from the government, in fact, even in a hostile atmosphere, Indians are succeeding. So Kamla Prasad Biseswar, as I said, she was Prime Minister. She is originally from Bihar. Mahendranath Chaudhary's forefathers were from Haryana. Anirudh Jagannath's forefathers were from UP, right? And so is the case with Shivsagar Ramgoolam of Mauritius. So this is the different contributions of Indians. So in Australia, Indians are making their contribution in areas like IT, education, research, development, social policy, and India today has become the largest pool of foreign students in Australia, right? And Australia, as you know, is a very big country. If not today, tomorrow, they will require people to work, and most reliable diaspora, which does not create any problems, it's a perception by and large, are Indian diasporas, right? So they will be requiring people from India, and today almost 1 lakh of Indians visit Australia every year for tourism purpose, right? So these are the areas where they may require, and as I said, it is today one of the largest source of overseas students, right? So this is the area where India's contribution is huge. Now, diaspora helps educate the host country about the various aspects of beliefs and life of their home country. If not, locals develop stereotypes about diaspora's home community. Now, why diaspora has become so important? Because I gave you the example of Israel. Jews constitute only 2% of population in America. And on all issues, as I said, despite America having close relations with Gulf countries, on any dispute with Arab-Israel dispute, America or any other Western country invariably sides with Israel. Why? Reason is not because of antipathy towards Muslims, right? That way Christianity was historically more intolerant to Jews rather than towards Muslims, right? Yet, and Israel is not a Christian nation, it's a Jew nation. Despite that, invariably they support. Why? Because they are into the cutting edge of decision making. They finance elections of senators. They lobby, they influence public policy so much by their contribution that America, irrespective of who is president or which party is in power, will not take any stand that is hostile to the interest of Israel. And Indian diaspora right now, situation is that for them model is Jewish diaspora, right? So that is why diasporas have become very, very important. And as I said, a party like BJP, which is in power, which was in power for 5 years under Atal Bihari Vajpayee and which is in power since 2014, was always favorably disposed towards diaspora, not now, even when this term was not even heard in Indian politics. Since then, and especially from 2000, they always believed in leveraging diaspora for objectives of diplomacy. Right. Then there is something called Global Organization of People of Indian Origin. Right. This again has been found by diaspora, not by Government of India, whereby wherever Indians are attacked or Indians become a target of racial abuse or anything, generally it does not happen as much as it happens in case of, say, Africans or Muslims, but still it happens here and there. But yeah, or sometimes as a community they must be oppressed, like in Sri Lanka. So, or when systemic discrimination against Hindus in some countries, like some Islamic countries, or when they were driven out from power when Mahendra Chaudhary was unceremoniously removed as president of Fiji. It is not Government of India which filed cases on their behalf. It is this organization, Global Organization of People of India, who are filing cases in different appropriate forums, right? So this is the contribution of diaspora for India. Now coming to one of the last topic associated with diaspora is that scheme called TOK 10. What is TOK 10? Transfer of knowledge through expatriate nationals, right? Now, initially we saw when we discussed brain drain that, well, poor countries are losing their talent pool to developed world. In order to offset the harmful effects of brain drain, the UNDP, primarily UN, came out with a scheme called TOK 10. What is this? This was started in 1977, right? Under which the successful diasporas, highly skilled diasporas, they voluntarily, without charging a single pie, simply if you pay them to and fro and accommodation charges, they come back to their motherland and they feel that it is payback time. They try to help their motherland, they share their expertise, right, with the organizations in the motherland. Now the recipient of this help could be anyone. It could be government, it could be public sector, it could be private sector, it could be corporate organization, it could be NGO, or it could be a reputed individual organization also, whereby diaspora come. They do not come permanently. Of course, some might feel so much attached to the nation and come back permanently and do serve their motherland, but some come, maybe the period can vary anywhere between 3 weeks to 6 months maximum. They come as a, and sometimes they also have this guilt that when their motherland has given them so much, it is payback time. So under this scheme, they come back and on spirit of voluntarism, they share their expertise, they share their knowledge with their motherland. As I said, recipient could be government, recipient could be private sector, public sector, NGO, corporate, individual, reputed organization, anyone. All these people can receive their help. What are the areas? Areas could be range anything, technical field specializations like agriculture, banking, business management, computer science, medicines, public health, hygiene. As I said, the list which I gave is illustrative, it is not exhaustive. There can be other areas also. I simply added whatever came to my mind. Intellectual property right. In all these areas, these expert diasporas, as a spirit of voluntarism, come back and share their knowledge free of cost with their own motherland. And they forego their fees. They are motivated by simple desire to give back to their country. So this is completely about Indian diaspora. I have told you the aspects associated with diasporas, like migration, like remittances, like brain drain, like TOK 10. Then I have explained you about the spread of Indian diaspora. I have even explained you the contribution of Indian diaspora, problem faced by them, government of India initiatives about them, how different countries are responding to this, what are different types of diaspora like mercantile, labor, IT. Then our contribution of diasporas to individual countries, I took 5-6 countries that way. Then these are the various aspects of Indian diasporas. Now question could be asked in a very general sense, like about contribution of Indian diasporas, or say um, government of India initiatives. What is that we are doing? I have explained you at least 10 or 12 such initiatives which government of India has taken about this. So question could be on contribution of our diaspora. Question could be on say government of India initiatives, or sometimes there can be short question on top 10 or this one, brain drain versus remittances debate. As I said, you will hardly get any material on this, so don't waste your time in searching for material. You will have to spend at least 20 to 25 hours in collecting this kind of material. You will have to read 20-30 books. I know nobody has so much of time or patience to do that. In this lecture of 5-6 pages, I have covered everything from the examination point of view. Whatever I have covered will be relevant, and it is enough also. Simply try to learn something more on OCIs, overseas Indians, overseas OCI card. As I told you, there are 3 types: NRIs, PIOs, and there is something in between, the special scheme of dual citizenship extended by Government of India called OCI card, or Overseas Citizens of India. Study something more about that and work on the questions that I gave. For that, don't waste your time in looking for material, because you are not going to get any. If you want to know, then you will have to read 20 books. I know nobody has that kind of time. So please read this 5-page article. What otherwise you can get in 20 days, you can get in just 20 minutes by reading my article, right? And try to answer the 3 questions that I gave. Thank you.